you.
If I had $1 every time in my life that somebody misspelled or mispronounced my last name, I would have a lot of money. Over the years, these are the several instances of how my last name has been, of Casasanta, has been either misspelled or mispronounced. Casanata, the first one there. Casanta, leaving out a couple of extra letters there. The third one, as you can tell, is spelled right, but a lot of times people, when they see it, they'll put a little bit of a Spanish twist onto it. So, Casasanta. And I don't look Spanish at all, so I don't know where that comes from. Other ones I've heard over my life have been Casanova, just because it's close. Casablanca, which has been fun. And then the last one, a good friend of mine who I've known for about 20 years was getting married, and I was in his wedding, and he texted me and said, "Hey, is this how you spell your last name? Casasanta." And instead of getting into it with him, I just said, "No, here's the right way to spell it." My mom always had a trick when we were growing up. When she would talk to people, she would say, just split it in half. Casa, C-A-S-A, Santa, S-A-N-T. So when it comes to last names and surnames, they're usually, you can tell, it gives you the chance to tell who's part of the family, or back in the day, who was a part of your tribe or clan. So nowadays, if you run into a Miller or a Smith or something, you don't really think that they're related because there's so many of those, but I'm guessing that if any of you were to run into another Casasanta, you might think, hey, is he related to Tom? But also too, last names were developed way back when based on occupations. So if you know a Smith, if you know a Miller, if you know a shepherd, if you know a farmer, that work history or that was a part of their lineage growing up. The other way was based on toponymic, that was a word that I learned researching this, but also topographic words. So toponymic are derived from non-hereditary names. So basically think of it this way. If there's too many Millers in one community, a community leader or a family member of that may say, okay, since you're about ready to start a new family, you're going to be the Milers, or the Smiths might be the Smites. Think of it that way. The other thing with those is a lot of times with toponymics, they were derived, they had built into them some sort of preposition with whatever the meaning was. But also too, last names were developed based on topographic, which is the land that was held, the place of origin, the residence, or something else along those lines. A lot of these two especially come from Europe, and that's where Casasanta comes from. It is Italian, if you couldn't tell, not Spanish like I mentioned. My last name in Italian, it's a habitational form for house of the holy, or in some instances I've heard house of saints, which is pretty cool, thinking about that. And if I had to guess how our last name was developed, I would say it was either toponymic / occupational. So my guess is that when it was time for our first set of ancestors to start the Casasanta name, they were either, they worked in a church, they were leaders in a church, priests, nuns, ministers, church leaders, and anybody with that last name was associated with the church. They worked there, they had ties to the church. This is obviously still most prevalent in Italy. The last name, when I checked, there was about 1,250 people with the last name in Italy. And as of 2010, there was only 309 people in the United States, including yours truly, with the last name of Casasanta.
Wow.
And over my lifetime and some of my family, we have had our Casasanta run-ins. For instance, when Mom was working one time, she was traveling for business. She walked into the hotel and the lady said, "What's the last name?" And she said, "Casasanta." And the lady looked up to her and said, "You're the first person I've ever met with that who shares that last name with me, who's not in my family." And then another time when I was in Florida at a baseball camp, they were running through the roster of the players who were supposed to be there, and they said, "Tom Casasanta, Zachary Casasanta." And we both kind of looked at each other and we both kind of said the same thing. You're the first person outside of our family from where we were from where this last name has come. And in the research that I did, The last name Casasanta is most prevalent in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Florida. So when it comes to the last name of Casasanta, I could stand up here, talk about myself, talk about my dad, talk about my grandfather, but instead, I'm going to talk about three unique Casasantas. Notre Dame, our mother. That is the alma mater for the University of Notre Dame. It debuted at the stadium dedication where Notre Dame plays football in 1930. The song was played at Newt Rockney's funeral, who was the famous football coach at Notre Dame. And today, like Carmen, Ohio for Ohio State, it is played after many Notre Dame home football games. And that song was composed by Joseph Casasanta, who was a 1923 graduate of Notre Dame. Granted, I never met him or anything like that, but he was believed to be the first Notre Dame graduate to earn a music degree from a prestigious university. He also wrote several other famous songs for Notre Dame, including Hike Notre Dame, which is still played at football games. And on his last trip to the Sacred Heart Church at Notre Dame, which is their famous church on campus, they knew it was going to be his last time there, so the band met him there when he got there, and they played the alma mater for him. And then a couple weeks later at his funeral, the Glee Club sang that for him. I'm not sure how we were related. I'm sure in some sort of way, distant cousin, but I was able to find some pictures of him.
My goodness, wow. Wow.
So when it comes to illegal gambling, legal gambling was very prevalent in the 1920s. It is still present today. From sporting events to horse races, to presidential elections, people would wage their money on certain events. The money would be collected and then distributed accordingly. Well, there was a Venanzio, or as they called him, Bananas Casasanta, who was my great uncle, my dad's uncle, my grandfather's brother, who was a bookie in the 1940s. And two funny stories about him. In the 1960s, my dad, they all went over to his house one night for dinner, and they were enjoying themselves or whatever, and he got word that the cops were coming to raid his house. So as my dad says, he walked into a back room and brought my dad a big black trash bag, and he says, go outside to the garage, and put this in a trash can, and then come back in. And he opened it, and it was filled with money. So he dropped it in there, came back in, cops couldn't find anything, and off they went. The other funny story is back in the 1940s and 50s, he was from Columbus. He used to drive to Cleveland, and he used to take bets during baseball season, the Cleveland Indians and the opposing teams that would come in. If it was on baseball games, what other events that were happening. But he always used to tell my dad, the team that always tipped the best were the New York Yankees. Obviously, they made the most money. And still to this day, our family are big Yankees fans, so we like to say that illegal gambling is the reason why we're Yankees. I don't have any pictures of Uncle Bananas. I'm sure he might have looked something like Joseph, but if I find some, I'll be share them with you. And finally, the most important one of all. This person holds a role that my dad once held, and I also once held too. They don't know quite yet of the struggle of the last name of Casasanta and having to mispronounce it and respell it for people all the time. And I'm sure that one day this person will get to, quote unquote, count their money for all the times it does get mispronounced. And that person is my son Jace. He, again, as he grows up, I'm going to teach him the history of our family, who the relatives were, most of them, not all of them. But he's going to learn the importance of what a last name is, especially ours, because in the end, he's the one who's going to carry out our last name. Thank you very much.